A dangerous earthquake struck the pyramids more than 700 years ago. An earthquake completely changed the shape of the pyramids, leaving them as you see them now. An earthquake that occurred, a violent tsunami that caused the destruction of an ancient wonder, of the seventh wonder of the world. Entire cities were destroyed, with thousands of victims and homeless people. An earthquake described by ancient historians as a description. It is very surprising when you hear it. What would happen if God forbade the pyramids to be hit by another earthquake right now? And how can we protect the most important monument in history? These are all thorny questions that we will answer today, and without much delay. With you, Iyad Abdelmonsef from your channel, Thorny Files. Man fears time and time fears the pyramids, a very famous traitor. And she did not say it out of the blue, the only one of the seventh wonders of the world. What is still standing until now? And not for 1,000 or 2,000 years. No, this has been for more than 4,500 years. No, this is also the theory that some researchers suggest that the pyramids may be more than 10,000 years old. And although a period like this is enough to erase anything, the pyramids, with its unique geometry, it has defied time. But despite the endurance of the pyramids, if you remember that this was the shape of the pyramids thousands of years ago, then I would like to tell you that you are wrong about the pyramid, my dear friend. Its appearance has changed greatly, and the reason for this is the powerful zaras that came back to Egypt, especially since the earthquake that we are talking about remained. Today, unfortunately, the most important aesthetic part of it has been atrophied, so you can see what the pyramid looked like before the earthquake and what it looked like after it. Do you think that if God forbid an earthquake happened again, would it be possible for the pyramids to be affected by it? In order to answer all these questions, we must tell you a story from the beginning. In the year 256 BC, the king decided, out of fear, that his builder would be like a builder who would leave the memory and live for thousands of years. For this to happen, he had to harness all the state's resources for sustainable construction, including workers, building materials, engineers, chemists, and others. He used about 2.5 million stones in building the Great Pyramid, including stones weighing more than 70 tons. In order for the builder to live for thousands of years, the main engineer who planned the pyramid had to calculate natural disasters, the most important of which were earthquakes and floods. Now, we ask a very important question. How did the engineer who built the pyramid plan to protect it from earthquakes? In principle, according to what Dr. Mustafa Waziri said, the geometric shape of the pyramid itself is earthquake resistant, and the solid base of the pyramid, which is built on an area of 230 square meters, certainly created a larger solid base for the pyramid. Except that the Egyptian engineers studied the magnetism of the area in which he built the pyramids. He was able to choose the best location far away from the effects of earthquakes and floods. And not only that, he decided to place 3 layers of stones, without any ceiling materials, under the foundation of the pyramids. The function of these stones is to absorb the first shock of earthquakes, and thus they will act as an insulator between the soil of the earth and the body of the pyramid itself. Can you imagine this genius brain? It was a connection. Why? Moreover, the pyramid is made up of limestone rocks, and therefore the impact of earthquakes on it will be much less. It is also not built of bitter mills. I mean, despite all these precautions, dear friend, only after thousands of years have passed, and after the pyramid has had dozens of earthquakes, it was bound to be affected, especially with the earthquake that occurred in the year 133 AD. I was still preparing for the action to begin. At dawn on August 8, in the midst of people in deep robes, Egypt was struck by the most violent earthquake in its history. An earthquake whose strength reached 8 degrees on seismic scales was even stronger than the violent earthquake that occurred in Turkey and Syria. Historians at the time, such as Jalal al-Din al-Suyuti, described the earthquake, based on its intensity, as a major earthquake. An earthquake not only struck Egypt, it struck about 6 countries, the first of which were Greece, Egypt, Palestine, the Levant, Turkey, and Cyprus. It was also heard in Tunisia and some other countries. The governorate most affected by the earthquake at the time was Alexandria Governorate, since the earthquake meant it was coming from the eastern Mediterranean. The earthquake passed, and a violent tsunami left water covering half of Alexandria. The ships that were on the sea were suddenly won, and without any introduction. There was trade and goods in the millions in the streets. The walls of the city sank in the sea, and most of its fortresses were completely destroyed. I will shock you and say that unfortunately, one of the most beautiful wonders of the world, the 7th wonder of the world, which is the Illuminator of Alexandria, which lasted for about 1,600 years, was destroyed. Thousands of victims drowned in the sea, their homes were destroyed, and thousands were also displaced from the city. an earthquake like this had happened, God forbid, now, it would have left tens of thousands of victims. Unfortunately, the number could exceed much more than that. The governorates and cities of the north and Cairo were severely affected. You can imagine, for example, entire cities in Egypt were destroyed and became in ruins. Among them, for example, is the city of Sakha in Garbia Governorate. My favorite is that there is not a single intact house in it. Among them is also the city of Abyar in Menufia, as well as 2 villages in Sharkia. May God have mercy on all the deceased, and we consider them to God as martyrs. And in the morning, I do not need to tell you that Cairo was very greatly affected by the earthquake. Dozens of minarets and the roofs of mosques were destroyed, and therefore the topic had to be heard in the Egyptian pyramids. So, what exactly happened to them? Uncle Iyad, he is still there today. Look, my dear friend, the pyramids as a building have certainly survived, and this is thanks to Dasto and the factors we mentioned before. But what was destroyed, unfortunately, was the white covering or the external shape of the pyramid. And if we do not understand what we are talking about, then let us go back in time to 400-500 years. The engineer who designed the pyramid, after he finished the body of the pyramid itself, wanted to finish it with a very beautiful, aesthetic touch. For this reason, he made an outer layer of bright white stone, which was an external covering for the pyramid. The Egyptians used about 6 million tons of white limestone to cover the pyramid with it. I don't need to describe to you how beautiful it is. When the sun was reflecting on the pyramids, the outer covering gave off a very wonderful shine. To the point that archaeologist Flinders Petrie, when he saw these covering stones, said, "I will not exaggerate if I compare the accuracy of the covering stones to be equal to the work of an optician at the present time, but on a scale of an acre, and after the outer covering, ancient Egypt placed a rim or crown of gold on the top of the pyramid, and this is to increase the beauty." 2 beautiful things, but with the violent blow caused by the 133 earthquake, unfortunately, the outer covering of the 3 pyramids collapsed, and the pyramids turned into the shape that you see now. After they used to appear in the same way, they began to appear in the yellow shape that we are currently seeing. Unfortunately, a very small part of the outer covering of the pyramid remains. You can see it, for example, on the top of a pyramid, Khafre, and the bottom of the pyramid of Khufu. Okay, where are the external cladding stones that fell due to this earthquake now? Let me tell you that a large part of it was used in other buildings. For example, you have Sultan Hassan bin al-Nasr, who used the remains of the pyramid cladding to build some mosques and fortresses in Cairo, since it means that this is how it fell. And I say this because of the foolish people who will sit and criticize us and say that the Muslims were destroying the antiquities. Moreover, in one of the sources I read that Muhammad Ali used a part from the cladding of the pyramid in the building of the Alabaster Mosque, which currently means the Muhammad Ali Mosque. As for the rest of the foreigners, they are so fascinated by the stones of the external cladding that they are very happy about the presence of a piece of stone that fell into the National Museum of Scotland, as if they had found a sweater, for example. And of course, I do not need to tell you that they will not find the stones cut in any other way. The legitimacy of what is important remains, and the question remains, are there other earthquakes that affected the pyramids? I regret to tell you that I love the last of them. For example, it was the famous earthquake that occurred in 1992. Let me tell you that the epicenter of the 1992 earthquake was in Dashur, which is an area very close to the pyramids, and therefore the earthquake was bound to affect it. But the effect was frightening because the earthquake had a magnitude of 8 degrees. I mean, thank God, there was no other 7-degree barrier. Otherwise, the matter would have remained very difficult at that time. Dr. Abbas Sharaki, professor of geology at Cairo University, says that there are large stone blocks that fell from the Pyramid of Fear due to the earthquake. But in 1998, the state returned and restored the pyramid. By the way, this earthquake had a greater impact on the Islamic pillars. As for the remaining pharaonic monuments, it was slightly damaged, but we can still say that until now, that unfortunately, the pyramids have become more vulnerable to earthquakes than before. Frankly speaking, we wanted to keep up with the times and said we would ask artificial intelligence and see what its response to us would be. The truth is that the AI gave us an answer that was very logical and proportional to the narrative that we told. And the answer was yes, but this topic of collapse and destruction of tumors will remain a little difficult and almost impossible. I do not mean, of course, that the topic is difficult for God Almighty, because you will certainly be insulted in the comments. I am only speaking based on the scientific sources that I have read. I mean, I will simplify it for you a little, and I will tell you that the effect will be on the killer. Firstly, for example, the pyramid will crack. Secondly, there may be a crack or break in part of the stones, and this over time will certainly cause the stone that was damaged to collapse. Thirdly, if a violent earthquake occurs 2 times, the stone block will certainly fall from the pyramid as it happened. This is how there is an earthquake in 1990. But just to reassure you, my dear friend, the permanent Egyptian antiquities, especially the pyramids, are certainly subject to constant supervision by the Supreme Council of Antiquities, and any potential damage will be lurking along and being repaired. We are talking, folks, about a national monument, so there can be no negligence in it either. As we said, the body of the pyramid and the angle of Milo. Its basis is that God forbids the idea of destroying it, or it may certainly be affected, but God willing, this is not the case. I hope you enjoyed today's file with us. Write to me in the comments if we want to make other files about what. And don't forget to subscribe to the second channel, Iyad Abdelmonsef, in which he summarizes films, and we will meet you on the phone. Good for an upcoming file, God willing. Goodbye.